o'clock. For Kevin, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, let's get started. We're going to talk today about payment accounts and the payment account summary report and some of the new holdback policies that we have in place. And we also have some good news as we go through. For those of you who have been following what we've been doing for holdbacks, we've got a good positive change for folks on that. And Brian, let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to, as I mentioned, talk about our payment policy. We're going to do a quick review on that. We are going to talk about the financial summary page that shows up on your race dashboard, and we're going to go through each of the items that are there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about payment account reports. So this is the newest stuff, this payment policy review. And this is really in reaction to the coronavirus situation that has occurred over the past month. We always had some holdback ability and we applied that kind of sparingly, race by race, based upon underwriting reviews that we did and based upon maybe races that might have had a bad chargeback experience or maybe there was some credit risk associated with that. But it was a little bit clumsy and kind of spottingly applied where we thought that it made most sense. Based upon the coronavirus situation that we've all been involved in, about a month ago, races started to be canceled on a pretty wide basis, and we were concerned about the fact that most races did not have much of a refund reserve in place. And we had a pretty significant concern about whether or not races would have the funds necessary to do refunds if that's what they chose to do, or if they didn't choose to do refunds and maybe wanted to postpone or turn it into a virtual race and their participants didn't like the options that they got or the value that they felt that they were receiving from the race. We were concerned about chargebacks and whether or not a participant would do a chargeback on their credit card and be able to pull money back to themselves and the race not have funding available to be able to fund that. So we put in place a pretty broad policy to start to build refund reserves on races. And for us, races can be an independent entity that have just one payment account, or they can be an entity that has a payment account that have multiple races associated with that. And so the payment policy that we put in place kind of takes into consideration both of those things as we're building reserves for a race. So we've broken this down into what we call pre-race reserves and post-race reserves. And they're exactly that. They're the money that we're building before a race takes place, and then the reserve that we hang on to for a little while after the race takes place. So this is brand new. When I say brand new, we put these policies in place probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, but we've updated them really just today. So the original policy was that we were going to build a reserve of 20% on each race, and then across entities that had multiple races to one payment account, we would build a reserve of 10%. So you wouldn't be able to get new payments to your race until all of your races under a payment account had reached 10%. And what we found in the last 3 or 4 weeks since we put this in place, thankfully, is that chargebacks haven't been as bad as we thought they were going to be. And so we've tweaked this. We've made an adjustment to it that we think is still responsible for the race and for ourselves in terms of having funds available for refunds, but also we think is responsible in getting money out to races, particularly if they're putting up new races like virtual races today, and they need to get some cash flow from them to be able to fund their operations or be able to do planning for additional races and additional events once those are able to occur in more of a widespread fashion. So today, the pre-race reserve minimum is 10% on each race and 5% across the payment accounts. So if you've got races that took registrations and aren't actively taking registrations today because they are, in the near term and likely not going to be held, or maybe even in the fall and people aren't signing up, you will get 90% of your proceeds on new races that are taking registrations today, unless those other races in your portfolio need to get funded up to that level. So that's what those two different percentages relate to. Once the race occurs, there's still a little bit of a reserve requirement, and that's to make sure in this kind of weird place that we are right now, that people feel like they can actually come and show up for that race, or they feel like they got the original value that they were promised for that race. So after the race occurs, we monitor that based upon the date that you set up for that race. And we hold somewhere between 0 and 10% in post-race reserves. The rest of the money that's been collected above that gets released on the second Tuesday after the race. And that percent reserve is based on a risk profile. So what's that risk profile mean? It actually means the number could be a little bit higher than that. If you have a race that's had a lot of chargebacks or a lot of complaints from your participants, but for most folks, it's just going to be this 10%. And maybe over time, if you've got a race that never has chargebacks and always goes off as planned, and lots of happy participants, that post-race reserve could go down to be less than 10%. The balance is paid after 3 weeks, and the only caveat to that is that if you do experience a chargeback, and this is what this reserve is meant for, we do hold that payment until 3 weeks after the latest chargeback occurs. What we found is that chargebacks can occur for a while. Credit card companies have got rules about that, about when that they can occur, but what we find is that they're not really monitored to the letter. And so we've seen chargebacks occur for significant periods after a race, but the most likely time is going to be in that several week to maybe month period after a race occurs. So we're trying to figure out whether or not there is a chargeback for the race. If we see one, we're worried maybe there's another one. So we reset the time frame after that, but it's only on this reserve that the balance of your funds are released, and once we know that there's no chargeback risk, then the balance of those funds are released to you as well. Next slide, Brian.
And Kevin,
yeah, go ahead.
Kevin, the one thing that I think is helpful, you've been a professional CFO that's also, had been part of a publicly traded company, is how do banks ask you or treat your companies when they talk about cash reserves?
Well, that's Brian, that's nice of you to call me a professional. I appreciate that. So one of the things, and this is really for any company that does business with a back-end processing company. In our case, we use WorldPay to do our back-end processing company for us. And when WorldPay brought us on, they looked at our business and they assessed the risk of our business, and they decide for us what holdback reserve we should have for that business. And that's kind of in a normal environment, and that environment has changed dramatically today. If you are a race and in the event industry, and you went to get your own merchant account today, you might find that you couldn't get one. The event industry has been hit pretty hard, and this is a risk management strategy that banks and merchant banks and credit card processing companies are all looking at. Is what is the risk that they're going to be on the hook for chargebacks, and what's the risk that the merchant that's standing between them and the consumer is going to have the funds available to be able to pay for those chargebacks. And that's really what this policy has been all about for us, is managing that risk responsibly. And that's really, that's really your risk. That's your obligation. When you signed up to do business with RunSignup, you said, I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to take care of chargebacks that are related to my race, and I'm going to make funds available for that. And so that's why we put this in place. It's really a reaction to the banking system and the merchant banking system and the requirements that they have to do business with companies like ours and companies like yours, is to make sure that we have appropriate reserves in place to be able to handle our obligations to consumers.
Hey, Kevin, how is Eventbrite handling it? And then you had a discussion with another large provider. What did they say to you for a new race that wanted to potentially come on to their platform in terms of the holdback?
Yeah, so what we've seen from Eventbrite is they're now holding all payments until after the event occurs. So they're not trying to calculate as responsibly as possible the risk and set aside an amount that should be able to cover that risk. They're setting all of it aside, and they're saying, hey, this is just too much risk to take right now, and we're not going to pay you out until after the race. So this is a real thing that's out there. This is a real risk. And we have, literally thousands of races that we've been measuring this against, and we think our approach is responsible at this new 10% level, but others are evaluating it to be much higher than that. The other piece that Bob is referring to is we always talk to other processing companies, and we have had some thoughts about being able to set up different ways of going to business, and we've talked to one processing company in particular about boarding new clients with us or for us. And that company came back and said, right now we're not boarding any companies in the events industry. And by the way, if we were to decide to change that, there'd be a 75% holdback requirement. So people are very nervous about this industry. People are very cautious and taking really conservative approaches. We think that we're being cautious and responsible as well, but with the amount of data that we've been able to gather, we think that being responsible now is holding 10% back. But in comparison with what some other folks are doing in the industry, it's responsible, but it's not as much as we've seen some other folks do. Okay. So
and people that have questions on that, we can definitely circle back to that at the end. So what we're going to do now is try to help our customers and anyone on the webinar try to understand what are we putting out when you go to evaluate the financial summary page of an individual race. So the first thing is the way to get to it is inside of the dashboard for an individual race. You'll click on financial and then summary. Once you click on that, you'll land on this page. So there's a bunch of information on this page, and we're going to drill down into that. So the first thing is at the top of the page, there's transactions, payments, payment account, and then admin. That's actually something the RunSignup admin team has. And so within here, we're putting a bunch of different pieces of information out. So let's start breaking that information down. So the first thing is transactions and sales tax. So transactions is as broad of a categorization as we could provide. The transaction is anything that we've processed. So that is a registration, that's an add-on, that's a giveaway purchase, that's an invoice. I mean, there's all sorts of different things that encapsulates, and it's not really dividing that in any particular way. The processing fees, those are the processing fees that RunSignup is charging. So it's subtracting that out. That does not necessarily mean that you're paying those processing fees per se, but that's against the transaction total. And then finally, if you're in a marketplace state, which we drilled on over the winter of RunSignup being able to help our customers manage their sales tax liability, we are collecting and remitting sales tax to the particular states that you owe it to. So we're going over this in a little bit more detail. So transactions, not all of these transactions may have settled. So this is one of the most confusing things about credit cards is that if you have your own merchant account for some other business that you have, you will find out exactly how confusing this can be. Not all credit cards settle on the same day. So Amex actually can settle on a slightly different day. You also can have, all sorts of different types of credit cards if you have your own merchant account or with different rates and things like that. So we try to simplify all of that for you. If you're on the page, the transaction is 99.9% accurate, but there is a possibility that while you're looking at the page, one of the neat things we're mentioning here is that someone could cancel their transaction within 15 minutes. Most of the time people are doing that because they've made a mistake and they want to cancel it and they come right back and register again. And then going over the processing fees, these are the fees that RunSignup charges to facilitate the transaction. And again, I went over sales tax where we help you manage that in marketplace states. So refunds. So if you were, which obviously now is much different than normal, we're transacting, I actually don't know the stats, but it is a very large number of refunds. We are calculating what we're doing in total refunds for this particular race. One of the things that we did to try to support our customers is that there is fees that RunSignup incurs every time that we push money back to your customer. We decided as a company we wanted to support our race directors who are going through the financial pain of having to push money back to the customer and eat that refund fee. So that is at this point would be zero, but in previous races it may not have been. Holdbacks and reserves. This is something that Kevin went into. So we're currently calculating that at 10%. We're calculating that on registration fees and not on donations and memberships or processing fees. So you can learn a little bit more of like how we're actually adding money to the holdbacks. So we're kind of doing that every day if you're not at your reserve minimum. So if you drill into the holdbacks and reserves, we've tried to make this as understandable as possible. So it's showing here our holdback amount is $93.58.40. And then we've got race name and your current reserve and desired reserves. So we're trying to show you, we estimate that you need $10,056.40 in reserves. You're $698 short of the reserve, so that will be added in by future transactions, or in theory, you could add money by ACH if you'd like. And then below, you can see each day we're adding in some holdbacks from previous transactions. So the desired reserve, that's what I was talking about on the previous page. So it's showing you what your reserve should be, and it may not exactly be 10% because of either settled transactions or donations or other things that were happening during that. Now, in the past month, many of you were funding your reserves and sending us wires or ACHs or checks. So that is another way to actually fund your reserve. And typically that is happening after you've had to change the status of your race. So you're not able to put it on in some shape or fashion. So you go ahead and fund your refund reserve at that point. So adjustments. This shows you the negative or positive adjustments. In this particular screenshot, we're actually showing both. So the positive adjustment is the check received, where the race has made a decision to send us funds to meet their reserves so they can issue refunds or handle chargeback, et cetera. And then on the negative, this shows you kind of what's going on with chargebacks. Pretty much every single day, I have somebody either email me or call me and ask me, how are chargebacks? What can I do to avoid them? At this point, there's not much we can do to avoid them. We've tried many different strategies to find out if there's something that we could provide to the credit card network that would make them happier because many of our customers are providing an excellent virtual race experience, including like having announcers through Facebook Live and shipping stuff and providing actual receipts of people receiving their goods, and credit card companies are still saying no. We hope over time to see a little grace from that, but we don't know. So this is showing you exactly what's going on with your chargeback. We include the reason in there. So it says chargeback reversed by cardholder after contact from RunSignup and/or race. Cardholder does not recognize potential fraud. These things, they tend to raise the blood pressure, but it's just data. There's nothing that, if you did everything you possibly could to produce your race and the government said you cannot put on the race, really just know that this is here, but the reasons aren't really that relevant. So we went over this a little bit before, so it's the same as the previous one. So we also do, I didn't point this out, we have actually won some chargebacks. I didn't notice this on, it looks like Yeah, it looks like the one at the top is actually a reversal. So a reversal is a very positive thing. So we are sending our race directors emails to let them know that you have a chargeback. And the idea behind this is that many of our customers have personal relationships with their participants who've been doing the race for many years. And many participants don't understand the impact that a chargeback has on your organization. So not only do you lose the entry fees, but there's also these fees that are assessed by the merchant banks themselves. So it's very painful for the race. And you can actually reach out to that participant. You can call them or email them and explain to them what this chargeback does to your organization and the mission that you're trying to potentially support, since many of our races are nonprofit focused. And once the participant fully understands that, and you may be able to explain to them options like, this race is actually postponed. You can do this August 29th. Why wouldn't you want to come and participate with us then? Once they understand that, they might actually reverse the charge, which many of them can actually do by logging into their credit card statement and actually canceling that chargeback. So owed to the race. So this is something that we're getting more and more questions on, and so we wanted to try to provide some detail on that. This is the total of all items on the report, and payments is what we have paid to the race. So if this race opened and it had $47,039.77 in the initial opening, that means that we may not have paid that race yet. Balance owed is how much do we owe to the race, but it's not necessarily the amount that's going to be paid in the next payment. And the reason for that, and we're going to dig into this a little bit further, is at least holdbacks is at least one of the reasons why. So at this point, we're now digging into the payment account tab. There's several different ways to get to your payment account tab. You can go into your RunSignup profile and go to your payment accounts. You can manage under financial, and you click on that summary where we were talking about. There's a tab there labeled payment account, and that allows you to manage the payment account for that particular race. So once you click on that payment account tab, it lets you know the name of the account so you can be sure that you're managing the correct payment account. You may have multiple, so you want to make sure that you're managing the correct one. And then we're going to provide the estimated amount for the next payment and when the estimated next payment due is. There's always going to be things that fluctuate within that, meaning if you issue refunds or if you had chargebacks or various other things that happen during that process that could change it, and that's why we call it an estimate. And then you can manage your payment account for more details. So at this point, now we're drilling into the payment account reports. Okay, so I was mentioning this is how you can get to it: financial, summary, and then payment accounts, or again, through profile, director links, payment accounts, manage. So these are the two ways that you can reach that. So Kevin, do you want to work on or discuss the settled funds concept?
Sure, yeah. So there's a couple of bullet points here. Most reports are real time, but financial reports have to be done with settled transactions. Typically, transactions are marked as settled in RunSignup around 10:30 Eastern time on weekdays. And that varies a little bit for how weekends and holidays are handled. Now, when I say within RunSignup, so RunSignup gets a report in the morning around 10:30 Eastern time that we use to update our system to show you what transactions have settled. But typically, those transactions only go through about 8 p.m. The previous night. WorldPay, which is where most of our processing occurs, they work on a day that goes from 8 p.m. to 8 p.m. the following day. So we get information the next morning that tells us what transactions happened during that period of time and were settled during that period of time. And we use that report the following morning to update all of our reports to show what's been settled. Okay, go to the next one. So this is a new page that we've added to show what reserve requirement is against your race, and that is based upon how many transactions have been registration transactions have been handled for your race. It also has the reserve hold dates for that, and it also has this concept that we talked about earlier of what's the required payment account reserve. So you can see that those two numbers are different. The required payment account reserve number is half of the required reserve for the race. And that's because they have two different thresholds, 10% for the race and 5% for that race as it relates to all of the races in that payment account. So if this race is not taking any new transactions, that payment account can only be built by transactions that are happening in another race. And we'll look to see that this race is at least 5% in order to be able to capture dollars that are going through another race to be able to build the reserve for this race as well. On the manage payment account page, some tips in order to hide inoperative races, take data off of there that's not helpful. You can use the hide inoperative tool to do that, and that will take some of the past races out or races that were in a draft mode. You can filter on a date in order to just get a subset of races by date to be able to look at. Also on the start date of the event, and type, name, and status are all different ways that you can sort that information to be able to look through it and gather information about your races.
Yeah, Kevin, one of the other things, I'm going to flip back to the last slide, that is extremely helpful for us when we're having discussions with customers to try to help them understand these policies and things like that, is there's a little exclamation point here on the reserve, and it actually explains to you, whether you've met the reserve or how much further funds need to be withheld to meet the reserve requirement. So just hovering over this would create that in the site. See, it even shows it here. Oh yeah, I was like, well, I knew I had a slide for this. So you can hover over this, and it shows you, oh, we need another 9680 in reserves. So this is super helpful. So hopefully for those of you that are wondering this, if you go into your payment account and hover over this, that'll give you the answer right away. And if you're asking us, that's what we're doing. So for continuing down reserves, we spent quite a bit of time on this. So I think we've probably, covered this at this point, and we'll probably circle back to this in the question section at the end. So the maximum reserve hold date. And so if this is before the race, this is the last date of the race, and the actual hold of the race will be calculated on the post-race payment policies. So Kevin earlier spoke about when we would release funds. So we're doing a risk review on every single race right now. We actually intend in the future to automate that process. So if we know, we can actually put certain rules in place to know if a race happens. Then we can kind of automate the release process. But right now it's all manual. So we're going to check to see, does it appear that items were shipped? Does it appear that people are submitting results? Or are people posting themselves with their cool medal on Facebook? Whatever information we can glean to help us understand, is the race happening? And we've actually asked races to help us with this process as well. And many race directors have been extremely helpful in sending us happy participants pictures or information where they can. The one part that stops this process is chargeback. So we've added a column in there called last chargeback, so that it immediately shows in there when the last chargeback has occurred. And so once you have a chargeback, that resets the payment, the post-race payment policy at least 21 days. We will evaluate this in the future, but this is just our policy that we want to run with for the time being, because if you're getting chargebacks in and around the race, that likely indicates a status change. You may have done a perfect job, but it indicates some sort of status change and some unhappy customers, and we're going to try to work with you to figure out exactly what's going on with that particular race. So required pre and post-race reserves. So we're giving you the indications here of how much money we intend to reserve before the race, how much we were looking for a desired reserve, the amount of money owed to the merchant bank for chargebacks, and the reserve hold back date is 4/29, which is 21 days after the last chargeback on 4/8. So this particular race has been impacted by chargebacks.
Yeah, that's what this report is showing for this particular race. If you look all the way to the left under the reserve, this race has no reserve, and likely this race took most of the registrations in prior to us putting the holdback policies in place, and they've now experienced chargebacks. And so all the way back in the beginning when Brian started talking about the financial summary and showed that the total at the bottom, this race has got a total at the bottom that's minus. It's negative $1,843.68, which means that this race has been overpaid. It's been overpaid by $1,844, and that's related to chargebacks that have been processed for that race. And this race in particular owes that money back. We have lent money to that race, not because we wanted to, but we're seeking that money back from this particular race to handle their chargebacks.
So this is going into the concept of if you have multiple races, which many of the people on this webinar likely have more than one race because you're obviously very engaged in the process and you want to learn more about payment accounts. So what we're trying to do to be fair and equitable is you need to have a 50% minimum of our 10% reserve across your races. So this is much simpler if you have if you've started a race with RunSignup today. It's very easy for us to get you in compliance with that. It's much more challenging math if you have races over the the preceding and looking forward 12 months. The revenue is going to peak and spike with your season. So you might have a bunch of races in the spring and you have a bunch of races in the fall, and we're trying to manage that reserve across those races. So more than 10% of the new race funds may be held if you have races that are far below the reserves and they have basically no registrations coming in. So it kind of lends to some lopsided reserves because of the fact that we're in a unique situation where some races are accepting essentially no future registrations right now, but they have a large reserve requirement. And Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so we talked about this before. So basically, if to use some math. So if a race had been set up and had accepted $10,000 worth of race day had been set up and had accepted $10,000 worth of registrations prior to there being any refund reserve requirement, that race would have a $1,000 today would have a $1,000 reserve requirement. If race B opened and was on the same payment account and that race began accepting registrations for the first time, that race also would have a 10% requirement. But funds that are being registrations and transactions that are going through race B will be used to fund the 10% that's required for race B, but will also be used to fund the 5% that's required for race A. And so that's what's meant about this 5 and 10% concept, is that some races aren't taking registrations right now just because of when they're being held, or if it's in a near term and people aren't signing up for them. But if there's a second race within that same portfolio that's taking registrations, we'll take the reserve requirement down as it relates to the payment account, but we'll still fund the reserve for both races at the same time, but at a lower level for that race that's not taking registrations.
Okay, so now we're looking into when you're inside of your payment account, it says payment amount and payment total. So payment amount does not include transactions that have happened but may not have settled. So that's something I was talking about earlier, where the transactions, you may be looking at it that day. Let's say you do a big spike and you have a nice registration day. Those transactions have not settled yet. And so the holdbacks are to meet the reserve requirements at the race or the payment account level. So we need to calculate that as well. And then on the other hand, the total does include all completed transactions, including unsettled ones. So that's the difference between payable amount and total, which obviously can be very confusing, but these are the kind of caveats that you have as to why those two may not match each other. And one of the other things that we did do is you can see there's a little eye here, and if you hover over that eye, and it's giving you this information, which is saying an additional $4,004.26 is in holdbacks. So we were talking about this a little bit earlier. So we're indicating, how much we've paid you recently, and then we're also tracking and providing a visibility on the last chargeback. So these are recent payments or payments that have already been made to you, and they typically include all registrations open in this year's race registration. And it also includes the new total, which is approximately the entire amount your race would be paid if there's no chargebacks. So then we're indicating if you have a chargeback, recently, then it's going to be impacted by our payment holdback policies then. And so we're going to wait 21 days from the last chargeback to release those funds. When you go into your payment account, this is kind of the information that we're presented. If you feel a bit overwhelmed and that this is a lot of information, you're not totally understanding that, just know this is better than what it was. This is a very complicated topic. And so our CTO, Steven Sigwart, has done many iterations to try our best to convey an extremely complicated topic of, what are you going to get paid and why, in a simple and usable fashion.
Yeah, so just
and
some
so
notes.
These tooltips, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so I was going to say just some notes on this particular page. So I'm going to start at the bottom. Estimated next payment on here is $19,936.52. And the way that you do the math on that, and this is an estimate. This is how much we think your next payment is going to be, but it's an estimate. And it comes from the numbers above. So we know that $16,149.89 is settled. So for sure, that's available to be made in your next payment. We expect between now and when the payment's made, we're going to see $3,963.03 that gets settled. And we know that you've got $4,004.20 in your holdback reserve. And we know of the $16,149 and the $3,963, we need to hold back another $176 and put that into your reserve. So if you take the $16,149, you add the $3,963, and you subtract out the $176, you get that $19,936.52 number. And then next to each of those is that little information button that you can open up to give you more information about what each of those different numbers and line items mean.
And Kevin actually just went over this exact kind of slide, which, yeah. So a lot of these we actually have kind of gone over in different points over here. So the most important things are, kind of using this information. If you look at this and say settle, that's exactly what Kevin said. We know these are settled, waiting to be settled. These are transactions that have occurred since they last settled, but can take longer around weekend or bank holidays. And then the rest of them, I think, somewhat make more sense, but the waiting to be settled typically trips people up because in many people's minds, if the money got transacted today, I should get it tomorrow, but that may not always be the case. So at this point, we want to allow Johanna, the master moderator, to guide us through some questions.
I think I was going to do that, Brian. Ha ha ha.
Well,
so
it was a good webinar. So yeah, talk to you guys later.
First, just to note, if you go to our blog, there are detailed blogs that basically go over the financial summary page as well as the payment account reports. So you can kind of double back and read all of that as well. And then Andrew Sigwart has recently published a video on the financial summary page, which is both entertaining and informative. First question, is it possible to fight chargebacks on our own?
So the answer to that is yes, and we're giving you information now about folks that are making.
No, they want to go to Visa, Kevin.
Oh no, that's a little harder. We would we believe that that's a service that we provide to you. We have access to the dashboard that we get from WorldPay and those reports, and we're experienced at how to work those and how to be able to fight chargebacks when we think that's going to be successful. If you have information about your race that and there's something special there that can help us fight that chargeback, we welcome that. For instance, we set up a new information area on your race. I believe it's there already, where you can tell us if a particular government entity has indicated that your race can't be held. It's a new piece of information that we've learned can be helpful in fighting a chargeback. So
actually, Kevin, right now there's something called a race survey. And if your race is completed, we'd recommend that you fill in that survey and provide us with information. What Kevin's talking about is that we are just about to release, either this afternoon or tomorrow, a feature that would allow you to upload a PDF or a link to a government order. So say the state of New Jersey issued an executive order that said no events over 10 people, as they have, you could include a link to that. We actually have a collection of all the state issued orders. We actually have a person that right now is generating all of that. So we do try to do a good job of trying to fight chargebacks. And if you go back to a webinar I did probably about 2 weeks ago, I kind of covered those pages in detail. Okay, so next question. The net is that we fight the chargebacks. There's no way to for you to hire an attorney and go to Visa and to go after each chargeback. So to open up a question again. So my race happened, and say it happened on April 1st. When would I expect to get checks from RunSignup?
So it depends on what the status of the race is, and so this is I was literally dealing with this email before this webinar started. Is that many people kind of scanned our payment policies and said, okay, if the race happened on the 1st, I should get my payment on the 9th or the 10th, like the Tuesday afterwards. That would be the case if the race occurred. So if you canceled the race, if you postponed the race, if you turned it to a virtual race, if you deferred the registrations to 2021, et cetera, any one of these things, these status changes, likely means that the participant did not get what they originally paid for. And so the intention is that you would get your payment 4 weeks. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the question is, if it really happened on April 1st, and April 1st is a good date because it's kind of April Fool's and what event happened on April 1st. But yeah, so if it happened on April 1st, about 8 days later, you would, during that 8 days, we would do a manual review of your race, and we'd set that reserve to be between 0 and 10%. If you had check-ins, if you had results, if your NPS score was, good, then we would likely set that at 0, and you would get paid 8 days later as long as there were no chargebacks. If it was still kind of unknown, it was a virtual race, not enough time had gone by to figure out if it was a valid race or not. We look at your Facebook page and stuff like that and can't really determine. It'd be at 10%, so you wouldn't get paid out anything then. And then we wait 3 weeks after that, and 3 weeks after that, you would get paid everything, unless there's a chargeback. If there's a chargeback, it resets the counter to 21 days. Is there a way we can push back the payment release date so the funds stay in our account for potential refunds?
Yes, so there's ways there's different options that you have depending on what you're trying to accomplish, but there is ways to set a hold date for your release. So a lot of our hospitals, government entity, basically organizations that can't handle payment, which sounds funky, but essentially they just want one check. So we built an option where you can actually set a hold for your race. And so let's say you wanted to hold your funds for until 2 weeks after the race or 3 weeks after the race, you can actually hold that. It's a little bit more complicated if you want to do that at the payment account level, but we do also offer a hold at the payment account level as well. The race level is much easier to understand because you can kind of target that particular race. You can target either a specific amount that you want to be held in the reserve, and we actually have a number of customers that do that. And then, or you can say just hold all funds until this date.
Yeah, and you can do that on the reserve page. So if you go into the little menu search, just type in reserve and you'll go to that page. How do I find out what chargebacks have happened on my race in the past?
So one of the neat things that we've actually done at the payment account level, so if you manage your payment account, once you get into your payment account, there's a long, well, for some of our customers, there's a long list of races, and you can actually hide some of your old races. And there is some detriment to doing that if this is an exercise you want to pursue, is there's a column in there that says last chargeback. So I was talking to a customer today, the last chargeback period they had was like April of 2018. And so that column fills in for that each particular race that you have, the last chargeback that you have, and it's going to go right down the list of races. You can look at all of them in one spot. That's the easiest way to do it. You can drill into each particular race, but I think that would be the most efficient way to do it.
I think this person is looking for chargeback detail, and so if you would go into each specific race, under the finance menu item, there's a chargeback sub-menu item, or just type in chargeback and you'll get to the page. And it is a complete list of the transactions that have been charged back, the dates, the participants, the person that bought and stuff like that. You can click on the transaction and see all the detail behind it as well. And so we had instituted when I think it was like around the 25th or so of March, any chargebacks that happen after that, we actually will send an email notification to the payment account owner or race directors for that race, and to let them know that a chargeback happened. But you can also go to that report at any point in time to see anything in the past. So this 10% holdback, if I've got a race that is going to do $100,000 in revenue, are you trying to build up $10,000 right away, or how does the 10% get calculated?
So that is, if that race is accepting new registrations today, then that money will go towards building up that $10,000 reserve against that race. If that race is not taking registrations today, but there's another race in that portfolio that is under that payment account, then any other races that are accepting registrations will attempt or will use proceeds from those races to build up a $5,000 reserve on the $100,000 race. So half of what it would have been if the registrations were directly against that race.
Sounds good. I think we've covered pretty much most of the questions. Anything else you all want to ask? Either type it in, gone. Any closing notes, Brian or Kevin?
Thanks.
I would say,
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think the only thing we want to share with you guys is that we do see, and Bob wrote a blog, we are seeing, lights of hope in that, things, we actually are starting to see some races that are later in the calendar year where participants are signing up. We just like you guys, only make money if people sign up for races. So we want people to go and enjoy your races. And so we are starting to see people sign up for races in the fall. Obviously, none of us know exactly how that's going to work or what the status of those things are, but I think people are hopeful. The participants are hopeful for that. We're hopeful for that, and you are as well. So we're hoping by races that start to happen at some point in the future, that will encourage participants to continue to sign up. So we don't want anyone to be deterred from signing up from races, hopefully in the future.
I think I'll add just some notes about kind of some general thoughts and kind of what's coming. So the general thought is that RunSignup is a technology company, and what we're trying to do is build technology so that you all can save money and can make money. And we think that our technology is useful at this point in time because I think people are looking for both of those things, ways to save money, like, having us host your website for free or provide free email marketing and things like that, or how to make money. And I think a lot of organizations have turned to virtual races. And we can tell you that people are making money on virtual races. So it is real. It's no longer kind of got this taboo around it, but it is viable. And what's happening is that runners want to run. They want to feel some sort of sense of community. And in my little town of Moorestown, I help direct this race. As usually about 1,000 people. It's the beginning of June, and we've decided to go virtual with it. And there's actually a fair amount of interest in it because people realize that you can't have the physical race, and yet they're still interested in connecting, and they're still interested in sharing their results and sharing their photos on Facebook and things like that. And it is real. It is something that people do desire, I think. And the proof is in the pudding. Like we're seeing. Transaction revenue, we do a weekly update, and it's only 35% of what it usually is last week. But a lot of that revenue is coming from virtual races, and those are definitely real. That's real money that's flowing to these organizations, which is a lifeline in a lot of ways. The other thing, just to reemphasize the fact that we're a technology company, like that one example that showed you where we had paid out a race $330,000, yet they were stiffing their card holders for $1,800. That is not our business. That's not what we're here for, and we are not a bank. So that's why we have these reserve requirements. In the next couple months, 3 months, we're going to be introducing a BYO merchant account. So that would enable you to bring your own merchant account that you would get at some other provider. So we'll be opening that up as well if there are organizations who feel like they can manage the merchant process better. So that's, I think that's it. There's a person's come in with a couple of late questions. Why have a payment account reserve and not just individual event reserves? I'll take a shot at this because what Brian and Kevin did, so we may as all three of us well have. We have a lot of organizations that may have had two events live already and say they've collected $10,000 from each of those events that are happening in the fall, but nobody's signing up for those events. So they're going to open a virtual race, and but there's still chargeback risk for those two fall races. So what we want to do is we want to build an overall reserve of 5%. So if those two races at $10,000 each, that's $20,000, 5% of that, we would look at holding the first $1,000 of that virtual race. But then beyond that, we'd only be holding 10% of the virtual races funds that came in. So it provides a way for race organizations to have that. And then the pre-event holdback and post-event holdback. Brian, do you want to describe the process that we go through after a weekend completes and what our account management team is doing and the data that we're looking at and analyzing?
Yeah, so to give you guys a scale, and there's like not a bot that can do this. Our account management team is evaluating on a normal weekend, give or take 500 races that may or may not have occurred. Right now, we have to assume that they likely did not occur. And so what we're trying to figure out is what did happen. And so if a race fills out the race survey, that helps us out because if they fill it out honestly and truthfully, and we can follow the information that the race director supplied to us, that creates more trust that we like, oh, okay, well, they've given us the information. This is what they did. They turned it into a virtual race. They're allowing people to defer to next year, and we can see all that data. And then we can set a post-race release percentage of, hey, release all the money because the race happened, release all but 5% because it appears that they've refunded or deferred pretty much everybody. So there's much less risk, all the way up to 20%. It appears that the race director didn't do anything, didn't tell people the race didn't happen. So we need to get in contact with this person to figure out what's going on. So we're providing kind of a risk management level from release all the funds all the way up to 20%. And that is done by people checking Facebook pages, seeing if we might even contact info at our support team to see if participants have reached out and complained about a particular race. We really can't find information, meaning like the Facebook page has been deleted, the website's down, okay, we need to dig into that further. So we're using as many online resources as we can to find information, and it is tremendously helpful if our race directors fill out the survey to provide us what you have done. And if we can easily validate that, that allows us to release funds faster.
Cool. I think that's all the questions that we've had. Anything else, guys?
Nothing else here.
All right.
Nope.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.